Hello, everyone. And for the second time today, thank you for joining us. This is our usual Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle, held every week at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. And we are so happy you're here, whether you're here live with us or watching on YouTube. Happy Father's Day to those who are celebrating today. So I am your host, Noor Kyle.
And I am her loyal sidekick, Mushtaq Ali.
Yes, and it's great to be here. This is our second talk of the day, as I mentioned, because this is the third Sunday of the month. And as many of you know, on the third Sunday of every month, we have our Two Talk Sunday because we are crazy and we love to just kind of share the wealth as often and as much as we can. And so we've already done a talk today. We do our other talk at 10:30, excuse me, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time every third Sunday of each month. So the next time we get together for that will be July 20th. So you can look forward to that if you weren't able to join us this month. So as always, we have to do our YouTube spiel where we invite you to do all the usual things to help support us and help people get more and more access to our channel. So that means you can subscribe to our channel, you can like this video, you can leave
Especially liking the
comments.
video. We get 1,000 views on the video, and we're lucky if we get 50 likes. And I think
Yeah,
that people are not hating on us because they aren't giving us hates. So if you are watching the video and you enjoyed it, hit the like button. It will help us.
yeah, people underestimate how beneficial that is.
Yeah.
So thank you for touching upon that, Mushtaq, because that's one important way you can help us out. But of course, there are other ways in which we can help each other out. As many of you know, we do our private sessions where we offer you one-on-one or two-on-one support in your practice of learning how to wake up and stay awake and to behave as a human adult. Those are our two most important priorities here in the Nine-Sided Circle. And yeah, we want to help you make it as easy as possible because this is demanding inner work. But we also accept donations, of course, and many of you have donated so far, but we are always trying to keep the momentum going so that we can keep our momentum going. Mushtaq and I are very much invested in the work that we do, and that allows us to keep the work going. So thank you so much again to those of you who have already donated in the past. Otherwise, feel free to join us on our Facebook group. That is active. That is where we do a lot of our non-talk engagement, as well as our email list. That's an important place to connect with us if you don't want to be involved in social media. But one thing that's exciting for us this week is the fact that I am taking the lead on our Instagram and I am getting the social media ball rolling so that we can allow some more access points for people who are new to our work, who may approach our talks and feel like, I feel like there's something here, but I don't really understand the vocabulary yet. So that's where I hope to fill in some gaps. And you can check that out both on our Facebook page and our Instagram starting tomorrow. So I'm pretty excited about that. Looking forward to engaging more on those posts, and hopefully you'll find them really informative.
Or at least amusing.
Yeah, I mean, either way is good with us. So, without further ado, shall we continue the thread of inspiration that we started with this morning, Mushtaq?
We might as well.
Yes. So, this morning we talked about the sacred breath. And as we discussed, the etymology of the words for breath used in many different languages has a really close tie to the words for inspiration. And that is not coincidental. As you'll notice, within the word inspiration itself, you hear this this inspire. This is about taking breath. And Mushtaq, what would you like
Yeah,
to do with this?
because there will be some slope-browed individual who will bust in and say, "No, it's not inspiration, it's breath and spirit." We know that already. We talked about that. So
Yeah.
she's making a connection here. Be patient. Take a breath.
Yes.
I could just see
Spiritist.
the comments popping up now.
Ah, well,
Yeah.
it's good to preempt that, right?
Yeah.
We know better. We know better than to let ourselves off the hook for that. So,
Yeah. And so inspire can mean to breathe in.
mhm.
It can mean to have a flash of insight, just like expire can be breathe out or die. There's some meaning there. Anyway, carry on. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just forestalling what seems to happen frequently on our comments.
Oh, yes. Yep. We understand know-it-alls. We do understand. We are a
We are
couple of
know-it-alls.
know-it-alls ourselves. So, we see you. We've got you on red. So, yeah. I mean, this evening we're just expanding on the conversation we started this morning about the sacred breath. And that's why we titled this evening's talk, Finding Your Genius, the Sufi Way of Inspiration. And breath itself certainly comes into this, doesn't it, Mushtaq?
It absolutely does. And as we mentioned in our blurb, there was this period of time that's called the Islamic Golden Age, where huge amounts of great scientific discoveries were made, discoveries in mathematics, discoveries in all sorts of things. You had like Ibn Khaldun's magnum opus that basically encompassed everything that he could fit into it. Uh, Politics and sociology and mathematics and all of these things. Um, and a lot of the guys who were doing this were Sufis. I mean, some we know, some we suspect, some we don't know, and probably one or two of them weren't. I mean, because you got to have one in every group. But they learned, some of them at least, techniques for cultivating inspiration. And that's what we're going to talk about this evening. How can you cultivate inspiration? And in order to do that, you have to understand there's no way we can go into this entire uh, corpus of knowledge in an hour to an hour and a half. So we're going to touch on some stuff that you can start with that will work for you. Make sense?
Yeah.
So here's the first question. What is inspiration? How many of you who are listening to this right now, either here live on the talk or on the replay, and if you're on the replay, comment down below. How many of you have received an inspiration on something that was incredibly meaningful towards you?
Yep,
Yeah.
multiple times.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any anecdote you feel comfortable sharing, Ian? No pressure.
I'm just not sure how to find something that is short enough. Um, some of this also comes down to synchronicity, and I have no idea whether
I'm pretty
that's
sure that counts. Yeah.
yeah. But back in 1987, I went through a serious thing that I call my first personal vision quest. There was a second one. I didn't call it that at the time because I had no idea. It's only in hindsight that I named it that. But and it was full of insights and inspirations. But one that was particularly significant for me in a very conventional sense was I came across something called category theory in mathematics. And I first came across it because there was a book called Mathematical Physics, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to remember the guy's name. But it was a brilliant book, and it's now out of print. But it was a very superficial overview of what category theory was all about. But it covered a lot of how it was practical in the realm of physics. And then I dug in my library and I discovered what is generally regarded to be the Bible of category theory, a book called Categories for the Working Mathematician by a guy called Saunders Mac, who was one of the co-founders of it, along with a guy called Samuel Eilenberg. Now, I was not a working mathematician, and over the years, I had to learn a great deal of mathematics in order to be able to make sense of this book. But having got my start with this other book, I almost immediately found out that or realized that this was part of what I was looking for, because part of what had started me on this was trying to find a mathematical foundation for computer science that made sense to me. And at the time, I thought that I had discovered this and as something sort of out of the blue. And I tell you, it's one of the most wonderful feelings in the world is thinking you've discovered something totally new. And a few months later, in September of that year, I discovered that there was going to be the first conference on category theory in computer science. So I actually wasn't the first to discover it, but
At.
I then it gave me a path for learning all kinds of things. But anyway, that's one example.
Would that be the book by Sadri Hassani?
Who? What?
Sadri Hassani, Mathematical Physics, A Modern Introduction to Its Foundations.
No, it was a very English name.
Okay.
Well, we'll keep a lookout for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's long out of print. The last time I looked for it was quite a few years ago, and it was already out of print.
Well, I have connections with several used bookstores, so if I can find, how about Donald Menzel?
The name rings a vague bell, but no, I'm not familiar with him.
Okay, because I've just found a used copy of Mathematical Physics by Donald H. Menzel for $5 and change from my favorite online used bookstore.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the guy's name because I actually went looking for it and it's buried somewhere in my chaos because I know that I must still have it, but I haven't, it's not in my regular
Yeah.
placement in the library. And
Yeah, there turns out to be several books by that name. And so if you ever figure out who wrote it, let me know, and I will use my incredible powers of finding written words to find it for you. Inshallah.
will do.
What a thread, huh?
Yeah.
All the way from, your personal discovery of these connections and then realizing that, maybe you weren't the first, but, other people at the very same time were drawing those things together as well. And
Yeah, and
that's
you
pretty
might have been the first. You just didn't write it down fast enough.
cool.
No, there were people who had been working on it for quite a few years before, but I was able to discover some of them. One of the names that springs to mind is a guy called Joseph Gogen, Gogun, and his colleague Jose Mesegre. I believe he is still active. Gogen died in a boating accident quite a few years ago, which was very sad.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, and today there are so many people. It's it's totally changed. I mean, for a long time it was hard to find a good introduction to category theory. Um, One of the best is probably by I think it's William Lawler, who was one of the co-founders of topos theory, and he wrote damn it, I can't remember what the title was now. But it's a very it was a he wrote a book targeted at high school students, and it works from a very elementary level into what category theory is all about. And my only criticism of the book is it doesn't quite get to one of the most important concepts, which is called natural transformations. Because Saunders Mac Lane, the guy who wrote Categories for the Working Mathematician, he said that categories were invented to develop functors, which are kind of the equivalent of functions in set theory, but between categories, and then to develop natural transformations. And it's very difficult to find a book that is elementary that also gets to natural transformations.
All right, Ian.
Yeah, we've spent more than
We've
enough time
digressed,
on
but we do that.
Yes.
that.
This is actually useful because people who get bored easily will have toddled off by now, and we can get down to the good secret stuff.
Right. Main chat. There we go. Okay. So thank you, Ian, for sharing about your inspiration. James says, inspiration, the quote unquote prophetic nature of the real, busting through our automated
Which
perceptions.
is actually not bad because prophetic inspiration is one form of this. It's not the one that we're going to get, but it's one form of it. There's an Arabic word, Wahi, which means to be inspired. And it's an interesting word when you look at where it appears in certain texts, like in the Surah of the Bee, 68. This is the ayat of the bee, and it starts out with, "Your Lord inspired the bees." And then it goes on to talk about what they inspired. If you're in the digital Durga, join in this week and you will find out all about this because we're going to do the tafsir of that surah. But uh, be that as it may, inspiration, how do you get it? Everybody can have it. There's every single person on the earth with a functioning brain can get inspired. And when we look at it from the Sufi point of view, we say that there are two states that are, we use the word kalam and sama. Kalam means to speak, it means speech. Sama means to listen. And these are the two, they represent the two qualities of thought or mind. Speaking is linear and organized, uh, step by step, and listening can be holistic. And in between those two, uh, there's a third word, barzakh. Barzakh means an isthmus or a bridge, something that joins one to the other.
Sometimes you can think of it literally as the in-between.
Yes. And so here we have our affirming, denying, and reconciling forces as exemplified by three parts of a process. So if you want to be inspired, here's one recipe. Say you're working on a problem, either with yourself or with your friends, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Speak the problem. Put the problem into words. Write it down if that's what works for you, but organize what the problem is in that linear linguistic form. Really look at that. Once you've done that, do a breathing exercise that we're going to teach you. Then listen. Listening can take a number of different forms. I literally like to listen to certain kinds of music. The only thing about listening to music is that it should not have lyrics. Instrumental music. So I like Turkish ney, Iranian santur, um, that sort of stuff. Or Bach. I love Bach for this. Beethoven's good. Mozart, it's okay. You know, anything that is just the melody. That's one way you can do this. And then after you've done that, go back and speak the problem again. And then listen again. Does this make sense so far? Very simple. Thoughts?
Any questions so far?
Answers? Any answers?
Mhm.
Whitney, you look like you want to say something. Yes.
Yes.
So when you were talking about it, it reminds me in the groups that I'm in, we call it anchoring it outside of yourself. When you are speaking the problem, you're anchoring something outside of you and you're putting it in that form. And sometimes even just saying things you can hear a particular, I that's speaking, a particular vibration that is coming through it. So you can kind of catch on to things a little bit differently when you do speak it out loud.
Yes. And doing it in a group is incredibly useful sometimes. You know, that various people's, if you've ever read Think and Grow Rich, old book on how to make money, the guy who wrote it talks about the mastermind group, a group of people who you get together and you hash out ideas with. This is very powerful and has been going on for centuries. Um, Einstein had a group of people like that he would get together and drink coffee and talk mathematics and physics. So groups like that are really useful for this part. RM asks, can we create our own listening? And you absolutely can. Listening to music is just one thing. I do my best listening when I take a walk. And I will tell you that walking is the most powerful form of listening that I know of. Driving, yeah, for some people. But if you are in a place where walking is safe and comfortable, it is a most excellent thing. Or you drive to a park and walk around in a park. I'm lucky because I live in an area that is very green and there's a lot of money here, so everything is kept pretty. And so walking around is very pleasant. And so I use that on a regular basis to allow the inspirations to come. And when you are listening, you are not listening for anything. You are uh, just opening yourself up to what comes. And it will oftentimes come in flashes. And the more you practice this, the better it gets.
It's kind of like how ideas come to you in the shower. Yes, that's
Yeah.
that's that's one
Yeah.
that comes to my mind. Yes.
Yeah, and James comments that a university professor told him that walking was absolutely crucial to philosophical inquiry.
There
And
you
I
go.
believe this is true. Um, I used to hang out with a guy by the name of Joe Miller, who was nobody knew exactly what he was. He was connected with the Theosophical Society. He was connected with the Neo-Sufism movements of the 1960s. He was a vaudevillian in his early years, and the way he taught was anybody who wanted to would meet him at the Arboretum at Golden Gate Park at 10 a.m. on Thursdays. And anybody who showed up would get to walk with him from the Arboretum to the ocean through the park. And during that time, he would talk, he would tell stories, he would stop and talk with one person at a time for a little bit. You never knew what he was going to do. And then when we all got to the ocean, he would buy everybody ice cream. My kind of teacher. But those walks would frequently produce states of inspiration in pretty much everybody. And I always thought it was a nice way to learn.
Yeah. So somehow there was this collective opening up to
Yeah,
see what comes, inspiring each other to that, right?
yeah. And he would sort of orchestrate it.
Hmm. So he would be perhaps the catalyst for that, and then all together you would sustain that for the walk.
Yeah. Yeah, he would basically bring us along just through his state.
Hmm. And as we often say, there is this phenomenon where people entrain to the strongest state.
Yep. And that definitely happened with this.
Very cool. Okay, so we talked about some ways that we can practice this metaphor of speech. Some of it is literal, some of it is less literal, right? Like writing it out, that kind of thing. Um, and we talked about so that's kalam. We've talked about sama, which is listening, and we've given a whole bunch of ways that we can practice that without being super forceful about it, right?
Yeah. And Ian has a thought.
Yes, Ian.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think there's a lot to be said for writing things out, but I think I may be a little bit peculiar or unusual in that I rarely do that. But what I do is form a very clear idea in my mind of what it is that I'm trying to achieve. Um, and it's the same. It's like a lot of people recommend journaling for things. I've tried it at times and it doesn't work for me.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Um,
I'm with you on that.
I was gonna say, you know, you're in good
mm,
company with that.
Yeah.
yeah, it's like when I form a picture of what I'm trying to achieve. But now I do recommend whiteboards. Um, but I'm thinking of one time when I shortly before I got involuntarily retired. Um, I'd been trying to get a meeting with my boss. Um, because I had a whole bunch of potential patents that I sort of figured out. And eventually I managed to get a meeting with him and literally talked through all this on the whiteboard. No notes, nothing. He was quite amazed. I mean, he was a smart guy. He had a PhD in statistics, but he just didn't work like that. But for me, once I have the picture, I can just talk through it from any direction.
Yeah. I was
So
gonna say that diagramming things out, that's another way of languaging something out. So absolutely.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And
I still have. He took a photo. I asked him to take He was a good photographer, and this was before the smartphones or anything. And I asked him to take a photo of my whiteboard so that I would be able to remember it if it ever got erased. And I still have that photo.
Oh, awesome.
nice.
It wouldn't make any sense to share it here, but I still look at it occasionally. It was a very elaborate, shall we say, set of designs.
Hmm. A snapshot of how Ian communicates.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. I can't write things down. I think so much faster than I can write, whether it's typing or handwriting, that I can't keep up with myself.
Hmm.
So I lose things if I am trying to write what I'm thinking down.
And as for me, not this isn't always the case, but it's often the case that I have in like a feeling about things that needs to be smoothed out and formulated into words somehow. So words work well for me, and I find them constructive. But I love that we have such a diversity of approaches here.
Yeah. So now we are going to give you a discrete set of steps that you can do to open yourself. You don't induce, you open yourself to a state of inspiration. So you don't have to have a problem, which is interesting. But if you're working on something, um, anything, any project you're working on can be plugged into this.
It's almost like a meditative focus, isn't
Yeah,
it?
sort of, yeah. But it starts out with the opposite of meditation, with this,
Mm.
with the kalam, with the description of what the situation is.
Yeah.
So, first thing you do is, in whatever way is comfortable for you, speaking, writing, thinking about, talking with friends, all of that kind of stuff. Describe the problem, describe the situation as discreetly as possible. And while you're doing that, look at all the possible solutions for the problem that you can come up with. Sometimes the inspiration will come just by doing this. If it hasn't, then you move from kalam to sama. And in order to do that, you must learn a breathing practice. This is a traditional zikr. And now science has discovered this particular breath pattern, but they don't do it the way we do it. So ours is cooler. And Noor is going to teach it to us.
I am indeed.
Yeah.
So, as we'll see, this one is even simpler than the box breathing I taught this morning. So, it's called like a double inhale breath. And it's funny because it's become kind of popular in not just self-help, but in like wellness domains and stuff. They call it the physiological sigh sometimes, but
Yeah.
it's the same thing. And it's been around for a lot longer than just recently, of
Yeah. And
course.
this is a zikr of the essence of the divine.
Yes. So,
And do it with the words.
I'm happy to do it with the words.
Yeah. People
But
can deal with that.
the structure behind it is that you're doing two quick inhales, followed by a slow, extended exhale. And of course, because we're going to be using words, we're going to be breathing through the mouth. And
Start.
to start, yes. So, first, we're going to do this with the zikr Allahu. And for those of you who may not know already, of course, this is the Arabic name of God, but I want people to understand that this is a term that can be used by anyone. And if you're uncomfortable with God language, try to be open-minded and think of this as symbolic
Yeah.
language.
Or if nothing else, think of it as a way to time your breath because that's what it is.
Yes, exactly. And who is, it's kind of like a pronoun. It's a gender neutral pronoun. And zikr is a way of connecting with what we might call the divine or with the greater reality. So, this is a practice that allows us to do that while also having a very conscious and immediate biological effect that typically tends to be very calming and very grounding because this practice stretches and fills the lungs with air and it triggers a rapid offload of carbon dioxide on the long exhale. And it's a very quick signal to the body that it's time to relax, to reduce tension, to reduce the heart rate, and in turn, anxiety is reduced. And interestingly, this is a practice our bodies do even without conscious effort when we're under stress, when we're sleeping, when we're coming down from stress, but we're taking an unconscious bodily function and we're making it conscious. So the way that it goes is first inhale, a deep inhale, and then a second inhale, which is a shorter kind of top up on that. And then you're doing a long exhale. And we talked about how long exhales are beneficial for soothing the body. And you'll see how that works with this. And you repeat this for 1 to 5 times, but if you're doing it as a zikr and not just as a self-regulatory practice, you do it as many times as appropriate for a zikr.
For this, we recommend 5 minutes
Yeah. Yep.
approximate. And if you listen to the syllables, it gives you the um, pattern of the breath. If you listen to the word Allah, you hear how there's the first syllable of Allah is longer than the second syllable. So that shows you how to do the inhale part of the breath. And then can be as long as you want it to be.
Yeah. We won't make this too hard today. We
Yeah.
want you to feel like this is accessible to you. All right, so let's give it a shot. And hopefully you'll be able to hear me.
Yeah, you're freaking out the microphone.
I'm freaking out the microphone.
Yeah, it's cutting
Okay.
out. Try doing it a little bit further away from the mic.
Okay,
Yeah, just a question. Were you
sure.
inhaling on the
Yes.
on the
You inhale, you
uh,
go like
Yep.
that.
that that kind of makes it
I
a little
know
clearer
this is
about
a
what was
little
going on.
weird. It's a little
Yeah.
different from what we usually intentionally do with our bodies.
Yeah. The thing is, once you learn the pattern, you can do it with the words just in your head
Hmm.
and just let your breath follow the words, follow the pattern of the words.
Yeah.
But breathing in and out like this is actually a good thing to do. And it's only for 5 minutes, so nothing weird will happen to you.
Shall I try to see if the microphone will pick it up?
Yeah.
Hmm. We talked this morning about perhaps to settle yourself doing a couple the breaths the way you normally do it. Go ahead and do that if you need to before you start.
That was perfect. Do it again. Now you've disappeared again, at least for what I can hear.
Yeah, it's probably reading it as a background noise.
Yeah. But that first one you did was absolutely the way it's done.
Yeah, and you just repeat that.
Yeah.
That's what I was
And the
doing.
longer you can draw out the who, the better.
Let me see if what I'm trying to do works the way it's supposed to.
Okay.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So you can vocalize it on the out breath, but you'll find that challenging and it's frankly unnecessary on the in breath.
Yeah. And RM mentions that she was watching one of Andrew Huberman's videos on this very thing, on the physiological psi. And yeah, he's one of the people who lately has been talking this up. I heard him talk about it some months ago and went, wow, they're turning into Sufis. They don't even know it.
Yep. And there is, I mean, as with many of these breath practices, there's scientific data to back up what these, what our lineage ancestors have known for a very long time.
Yeah. So you do this breath practice for 5 minutes. Then you shift in from kalam to sama. This is the bridge from one to the other. And in the sama, you can do whatever works for you. Listen to music, take a walk, take a long shower. And what you want to do is ideally let your mind float, to just be with your breath. And you don't breathe in any particular way, except in a relaxed manner. Unless you're running. And if you're running, you'll breathe a little bit more than relaxed, but that's okay too. Anything that allows your mind to be quiet. And you don't think about the problem. You don't think about anything in particular. Listen to the bird songs. That's one of my favorite things when I am walking is listening to the birds sing. And
Yeah.
the squirrels scold me as I go under their tree, things like that.
Noticing the quality of the light through the
Yeah.
leaves
Yeah,
on the
all of this
pavement.
kind of stuff. Just
Yeah.
be with your senses. And if you talk to yourself in your mind, that's fine. Just don't talk about the problem. Talk about something fun.
Something that's not going to get you riled up too much either.
Yeah. Yeah, because that will pop you right out of the state.
Exactly. Yes. And we're working to,
And that's why if you're using music, you don't use music with lyrics because the lyrics will force you. Uh,
yeah, you're not looking for a hook for
yeah.
your attention. That's what I was trying to say. Yes. So,
James wants the meaning of Allahu. And the answer is Allah is the collective name of the attributes of the divine theophany.
Ah, you went
All
deep.
of the attributes, infinite as they are contained within the name Allah, who is the name of the essence of the divine theophany, that which is beyond the manifestation. So that's the meaning. It's simple.
Is that helpful, James?
I was already aware of it myself, but I thought just for people in general.
Thank you. Thank you
But
for
having said that, for the purpose of this exercise, is contemplating the meaning at all relevant, or would it be in fact counterproductive?
No, it could be relevant.
Okay.
Um, I don't, as a rule. I just listen. I know what
Yeah.
the names mean, and so I
Yeah.
listen to them.
Hmm. Hmm. Good, good.
Now, the one last bit of this is carry something with you that will allow you to record any thoughts that come up while you're doing whatever you're doing to listen.
Mhm.
So a notebook, your phone with a notepad on it, or a dictation program, whatever. I use a dictation program that I can just talk into my phone, and it's speech to text.
I have a black and white composition notebook or black and purple. I often like that one. But for travel and for usability, I have my sparkly pink one that I love to use because it's so easy to jot down things quickly and not lose them. And then I can take it on to whatever task needs to be needed that inspiration. Mushtaq will tell you sometimes when I'm doing my morning routine, brushing my teeth, all that stuff, I will take my notepad in with me because that's the time
Yeah.
when I tend to get a lot of really beneficial insights.
And RM uses her phone notebook app.
Mm-hmm. Yep, another good option.
Yeah.
Sketchpad.
Out of curiosity, do you actually interrupt your meditation to take notes?
No,
Sometimes.
it's not an interruption.
Okay, I mean, at times over the years, I've been very creative while I do my regular practice, but I wouldn't want to to break it off and interrupt to take notes. Um,
Yeah, you do whatever suits you. And I guess it really depends also on what we experience as an interruption, too.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that's occurring to me listening to all this and comparing it with my own experience is that there's just a whole lot of ways of doing this kind of thing. Um, and actually what you've been describing actually kind of makes sense, but particularly if someone is not practiced in knowing how to do these. I mean, I, I've found all kinds of ways of going into the listening thing. I remember a particular example years ago where I was struggling with a problem over a whole weekend over a race condition in some microcode. And it literally took me almost the whole weekend, and I did everything from just being quiet to reading science fiction, anything that would block out and keep the surface mind occupied while the background mind figured out what the problem was. And eventually I figured it out. But I didn't figure it out by directly figuring it out. I figured it out by blocking out the surface mind, and eventually the solution appeared out of, just because I'd fed myself with the details and then given my mind the time to put all the pieces together, but I couldn't do that with my conscious mind.
Hmm. Well described. Yeah. I think of all the things that I do to distract myself on purpose, for a purpose. Cross stitch. Lately, I've been playing Tetris on my phone because I went to a Tetris championship last weekend. Competitive Tetris. Yep. I did not participate, no, but I was inspired. I was inspired to pick it back up myself. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
and video games are a good way of
Chris is here.
yeah, Chris is here.
We could say Happy Father's Day to Chris.
Yeah.
Happy Father's Day!
Hey, thank you very much.
Thanks for popping in.
Yeah, interesting topic today.
Good.
Yes. Yes. Mm.
So the last thing to do after you have gotten so you do the kalam, you do the talking part, you do the breath, you do the sama. Then whether you've got anything or not, you go back to the talking part, which is either you write it down or you just go, "Oh, I have yet to solve this," and you rinse and repeat until you can completely relax and let the inspiration come through, because that is the secret to this is inspiration happens when the mind is um, in soft focus.
That really, that kind of touches on why having the breath practice as an aspect of this becomes important, right? You're tuning not only, if you want to think of it that way, to the divine essence and inspiration and such, but you're also doing it in a very practical way. You're settling down the body, clearing the mind, and allowing for that openness to happen while also being very clear to the extent that you can be about the situation or problem you're trying to address. And doing that without being in an activated state about it. I'd like to hear from people we haven't had the chance to hear from yet. Alka, how are you doing with this?
I am good. Today doesn't seem to be my day. But I think I wrote something in the chat. Maybe it's the.
Oh, maybe I haven't seen it yet.
That's right. I, I mean, by listening to all this, I feel that if I was not inspired or what we call mentally simulated or stimulated by many things that we're describing here, um, and like that doesn't seem normal, I may not be on this path. All those experiences make this knowledge more sensible, more believable. That's what I was feeling when I was listening to this talk today.
Thank you for sharing, Alka. All right, so we have a couple thoughts in the chat. Whitney says, I love Tetris. Yay.
You guys are Tetris
Um,
sisters.
what's that?
Said you guys are Tetris sisters.
Yes, we can be Tetris sister. All right, and RM says, I need inspirations all the time for motherhood and thinking outside of the box in difficult medical cases. Yeah, I would imagine that absolutely to be the
Yeah.
case.
And the literature is full of scientists who came to great medical breakthroughs using something like this, getting inspiration. Uh, we don't really have time to go through all of them, but I'll give you one. Crick, dreaming of two snakes wrapping around each other and waking up and realizing that that was the double helix he was looking for DNA. I
Mm.
think it was Crick. Might be somebody else. I don't know. But that's how it happened, or so they say.
No, I think you're right on that. I've certainly experienced lots of stuff in a sort of semi-dream state.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's okay if you're doing this breath practice and listening to almost fall asleep. There's a thing called a hypnagogic state that really is porous to inspiration. And that happens just before sleep.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's what came to my mind is I have a lot of pretty cool ideas right when I wake up, especially if it's before the sun has come up yet, before there's any noise or conversation, any disturbance. The ideas are really fresh and vivid then.
I
Yes, Paul.
have a question.
Yeah.
Um, like all this talk that is happening today, I feel like that was more my past. I'm in that surrender state, like where if something just feels right, like for example, I wanted to be on a vacation recently and just nothing. I was looking at all these beach places, mountain places, all these places, and nothing was inspiring me. And then I just surrendered, which is my state nowadays. Um,
If that's the case, you have nothing to worry about. You're fine. Relax.
okay,
Good.
okay. And then once something came, there was no confusion at all, and I said yes to it. So
There
is
you
that
go. You're doing fine.
is
Yeah.
okay? That's just feeling, right?
Take a
You
breath,
just go with your feeling.
relax, and
Yeah,
just accept that that's what's true for you right now.
gotcha, gotcha. Okay, but that's also inspiration, right? Like,
Sure,
is
why
it
not?
inspiration? Okay, okay.
So there's one last thing. If you are working with a group, and I highly recommend that if you can, getting a group of like-minded people together, you bring your inspirations back to the group and talk about them. Get feedback. Don't let anybody bring you down, but put them out into the linear world again. So to recap, first, the kalam. Speak your problem. Put it together in a concise, linear form so that it is clear and understandable. Then do your breath exercise. Then do your sama, listen, in any of the ways that we've mentioned and 100 different ways that we haven't. I used to ride my bicycle, and that would be my listening sometimes, frequently. Um, if you get an inspiration, record it in some way and then share it with your working group or your friends group if you have one. And then implement it, see what happens. Maybe the inspiration won't work, maybe it will.
Maybe it's fuel for something else.
Yeah.
something you don't expect yet.
And there's a lot of different ways to do this. This is one that we use because it has worked for us for 1,000 years. But it's not the only way. We're not saying that our way is better than your way if you have a way that works for you. We're saying whatever works for you to give you the inspirations that you need to address the interesting parts of your life. That's great. Here's one. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't.
Hmm.
Thoughts? Last thoughts.
Yeah. Whitney, is it okay if I invite you to chime in? Share your thoughts?
I had my finger on the button. Uh, I think I'm just connecting what Elko was saying about being in a surrendered state. And I think generally we kind of walk around with these programs, the same things going around in our head, and um, that ability to surrender to even just the silence, to allow something to come in. It seems like that's kind of what this practice allows you to do. And I love the breathing practice, because it's so automatic, so mechanical the way we breathe, and so to come with this new breath and allow that spaciousness to kind of penetrate you almost. Just sounds like that's the way to allow these inspirations to come in and to get that monkey mind out of the queue, or the queue, stop the queue from just rolling itself as it usually does, and to allow that spaciousness to let something else in. But I don't think I definitely have voiced my issues and my problems, but I don't, and I like have a couple of things that I could possibly do that are just like theoretical, and I don't actually try to think of different ways to do it. So I like that this is like a focused attention on, okay, what's the problem? Speak it out loud, workshop, and then do nothing. Do the breath work, go for a walk, like allow it some spaciousness, and to kind of, I think it's just going to be an interesting exploration to try this practice, and I'm looking forward to it.
I love that idea of using a problem as an opportunity. You know,
Yep.
that's such a great insight. Thank you, Whitney. Thank you for sharing. Yes, James.
Just quickly, inspiration and prophecy. Now, what's the difference between,
Yeah,
I suppose,
it's
seeking
simple.
in,
It's simple. Prophecy is above your pay grade.
well, fair enough. Um, but like, is prophet inspiration is something you can seek? Is prophecy something that prophecy something that is given to you?
So they say.
Right. Hmm. I'm asking because I found a really, really cool William Blake quote early in the week about prophecy, and I kind of like it, but no, it's really relevant here.
And what was the William Blake quote?
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll bust it out. Give me a second. Well, it's relates to his theory of knowledge, but this is from There Is No Natural Religion. If it were not for the poetic or prophetic character, the philosophic and experimental would soon be the ratio of all things, and stand still, unable to do other than repeat the same dull round over again.
Yeah, Blake did a beautiful painting of that very thought. It's the
What?
old blind man with the compass.
Ah,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. You know what?
mm,
I think, James, if you feel up for it, you should share that quote and maybe grab that picture and post it on the forum.
Yeah.
sure. Um, hmm. So just had the image of something beyond the small self's calculations,
Yep.
something, and but also the proposition that the small self's calculations, if that was really all that was going on, they would soon become entrapped in this self-reinforcing sterile.
Yeah, and he's right because as my philosophy professor pointed out years ago when I was a young lad, he said there is more than one kind of fact. Scientific facts are absolutely perfect, as are poetic facts. Alka, take care.
Hi, Elka. Thanks for being here.
So, a scientific fact can tell you everything that science can tell you about the weather one day. A poetic fact will tell you everything that it can tell you about the weather that day in totally different language, and both will be equally true. So, Ian, you have a thought.
Yeah, I just had a couple of things that I wanted to add. One is that I think it is useful to not always um, be over precise. Not quite sure how to express that, but let me give an example. I remember reading a book on fractals a long time ago, and they made a point that it was premature to define what a fractal is. This was still in the relatively early days. I think these
Yeah.
days it's sort of pretty settled. But I've found that in my own work that it's useful to keep the goal fairly open often and allow for it to move in directions that you hadn't thought of originally and that weren't part of your original goal.
I would love to argue with you about that, but unfortunately, I think you're right.
No, I think
Yeah.
that's a perfect detail
Yep.
because it allows for real expansiveness and real creativity to happen.
And the second one is just a thought about groups. Um, I didn't discover this until way too late in my career. Um, but somebody I worked with for a while in the early 2000s was a very good moderator. And one of the things that and it took me actually several years to really have this clicking in my brain. But one of the things he used to do that I eventually found to be enormously valuable was, and this was working with groups over video calls. This was pre-Zoom days when we actually had video call rooms in each of the plants. Um, One of the things he would do is he would repeat things back to people in a slightly different way. So he wouldn't just record what somebody said. He would, particularly with keeping the goal of what we were trying to work on in the group in mind, he would adjust the way it was said. And I know that sounds horribly vague, but excuse me. Eventually, I found that to be a remarkably useful technique for moving conversations around. I don't know if the way I'm explaining it is going to make that much sense, but I just wanted to throw that idea out there.
Hmm. I forget what that practice is called, but I know what you're talking about, Ian. And I think it's a really great thing to have like in a working group, for example, someone who finds the common thread in the conversation or knows how to reframe things so that it's the same idea, but it puts a spin on it that keeps the thread going and comes up with even more inspirations.
Yeah, one of the examples here in my personal experience is that there was a group of projects split over three different plants, and these groups had been stuck for a while, and I don't know why they asked me to get involved, but when I did, I was able to get them unstuck in just one session, largely by using this technique and focusing people's attention on what were we trying to do, what with the people who were objecting and getting things stuck, what were their alternatives that they were trying to that they thought might be feasible, and just working through all those pieces kind of systematically, and eventually we managed to get things moving forward again.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did that with a group I was volunteering with um, a year or two later, where there were people who were sort of stuck, should we say, and I did a session with them, and again, it came down to, well, we've got this one path that looks like it could work. Are there any alternatives to it? And basically, nobody could come up with any alternatives. And by the end of the session, we ended up with agreement. In fact, I know this is going to be a bit of a brag, but a friend of mine who was doing leadership training at the time said, um, how does she put it? It's like, I wish you could figure out how to encapsulate what your magic technique is, but it's but it would be worth $1 million.
Well, who knows? Maybe you will.
Yeah, I'm kind
And
of
then you can have $1 million.
yeah, I'm kind of too old for that now. This was
Yeah,
what
you're never too old to get rich, man.
no, no, but I'm too old to put in the effort.
Thanks, Ian. Well,
Uh,
Chris, sorry, did you have something
no,
you
go
wanted to?
ahead.
I was just gonna say, Chris, I know you're popping in a bit towards the tail end, but I'm wondering if you have anything you might like to share.
So maybe you already covered this, but as far as I know, the first time that the word genius comes up in Latin is by this guy Apuleius.
Yeah.
And did you guys talk about that?
No, we
No,
didn't
not
actually
Okay.
talk
no.
about it.
And so yeah, he's third century AD. He wrote the Golden Ass and a few other books, and one of them is the God of Socrates, where he talks about the daemon.
Yes.
And when he has to translate that word daemon, he uses the word genius. And it's interesting how he talks about in the story of Socrates how the daemon that he was working with would always tell him what not to do. Like, no, don't go do that. No, like don't like restrain yourself. And basically saying that like that doesn't mean that everyone's daemon is going to necessarily do that. That's just what he needed, for him. And when you get into the Platonic tradition, there's like a whole set of classes and categories of daemon that all act in different ways and have different functions, and it gets pretty elaborate. And I wonder if I did want to know like what's the daemon equivalent within the Sufi tradition.
there various people will talk about various things. Ibn Arabi will talk about some of this, but the basic idea is that it's a metaphor, and the idea of genius is a moral or a guardian spirit that will give you guidance for your whole life. And I mean, some people would probably think, yeah, we have these spirits, there's angels sitting on our shoulders and all of this kind of stuff. I see that more as a metaphor for the process of inspiration, that very process for inspiration is your genius, because that's where the genius ideas come from. I know some people talk about it as if it were a parts party. You have all of these
Mm-hmm.
parts of you that are,
IFS.
yeah, and that's more elaborate than this, but it's not. It is a useful idea. So we don't go that much into the idea of daemon and all of that,
Angels on the shoulder,
angels on
etc.
the shoulder, or any of those things, because we consider that to be a metaphor for something that's real.
When you get into how the treatment of the daemon ends up being, it sounds like maybe it could be within the category, and I don't know enough about the Sufi tradition to know if like jinn, if they're all bad or if there's like
There are good
helpful jinn.
there are good jinn, there are bad
Hmm.
jinn, there are indifferent jinn, there are Christian jinn, there are Muslim jinn, there are Buddhist jinn, and for all of them, it's best if you leave them alone because they will make you insane.
They'll teach you how to wield a knife in more ways than a human can.
Yeah, exactly that.
Good
That
stories.
that does sound very daemon like, because in that same vein, there's the
Yeah.
helpful ones, the not so helpful ones, and the other ones.
Hmm.
Yeah. And even within yourself, you have the parts of yourself that represent those things. So you don't have to look outside yourself to some external spiritual force. And it's better that you don't, in my humble opinion.
Good question, though, Chris.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the people who channel angels and stuff. I imagine various spiritual beings somewhere in the higher plane or lower plane going, "Hey, hey,
Just messing with them.
tell her to do this.
Yeah, right.
Tell him he has to wear a garlic on the top of his head.
Mm,
Tell him that to be enlightened, you have to have a pet duck." That one may be true. I can mess with myself. I don't need outside help for that. James has one more question.
Oh, it's a bit no, it's an anecdote if everyone else is finished with questions.
Go for it, and then we're going to have to wrap it up.
Just quickly, in the Australian coast, we have Byron Bay, the big New Age hippie centre. Now, it's supposed to be located on an Aboriginal healing ground, but apparently, I'm not sure of the accuracy of this. With the Indigenous Australian healing grounds, you're not supposed to stay there. You go there for healing, then you leave before you overload and go nuts. And everyone I know who moves to Byron Bay and stays there ends up kind of nuts, normally in some horrific crystal light channeling way. If you ever want to sicken yourself, there was a Netflix series called Byron Bays, Baes, about the sort of we dress all in white and have lots of crystals and lots of money movement that gravitates towards Byron Bay, and they all seem pretty flaky. Perhaps whether they're flaky before they got there, I don't know. But you're just thinking about good gin. But so even if there's good gin, perhaps hanging around them too much makes you overload and go nutty.
Perhaps
Like
so.
I said, it was a waffling anecdote. It wasn't a question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe that's some entertainment we can check out sometime. Thank you, James.
If you really want to enrage yourself, though, you'll hate the people. They're terrible. I hate them all. I've never met them.
Gotta love a good trope, right? All right. Thank you so much for joining us for our, rounding off the day with us. We started with the sacred breath. We're ending with sacred inspiration. And we've talked about many different ways in which we can go about that, all of which boil down to our thesis that we speak, we listen, we bridge those two through the breath. It
And we
all
bring it
comes
all
back
back
to breath.
home.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to switch this over to Brady Bunch view.
Anything you want to add, Mushtaq, before we say goodbye?
No, this has been a fun talk. I have
Mhm.
enjoyed this.
And we hope you'll give that breath practice a try. And remember, you can use the verbal zikker. You can also make that an internal zikker once you feel like you've really gotten the rhythm for it and gotten attuned to what it can bring out. So, 2 inhales, pulsed inhales, long exhale. And notice what that does for you. I find it very relaxing, very soothing. And you may also notice that your body does it automatically at certain times too. And that just goes to show that this is a deeply, deeply embedded practice for us as not just beings, but as mammals. All mammals do this. All right. So we can, we're on Brady Bunch mode.
We're on Brady Bunch mode.
Thanks for an amazing third Sunday for June, and we'll be back to our normal schedule of our weekly talks next week on Sunday. And remember to check out our Instagram, and hopefully we'll have some
Link
fun
in the
with that.
description.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're on our Facebook page, you'll see some of those same posts as
Yeah.
well. So, all right, everyone, we can wave to each other. Wave to everybody who's watching on the replay. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.